You have 72 hours to begin demolition, or we will start issuing daily fines of $500. That was the line. That was the sentence that echoed in my head, a declaration of war delivered on my own front porch by a woman who looked like her face would crack if she ever attempted a genuine smile. Her name was Brenda, and she was the self-appointed queen of our little suburban kingdom, the president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I had moved here 6 months prior, seeking quiet. My wife, Eleanor, had passed away the year before, and the silence of our big family home had become a crushing weight. This smaller house, with its sprawling, oak-shaded yard and a detached guest house that was perfect for my workshop, felt like a fresh start. A place to grieve, to heal, and to finally unpack the tools I hadn't touched since she got sick. It was Eleanor's dream for me, really. She knew my hands needed to be busy. I'm a structural engineer by trade, retired now, but the instinct to build and to understand how things fit together never really leaves you. She used to say I analyzed everything like it was a bridge in need of a stress test. This community, with its manicured lawns and matching mailboxes, seemed like the last place on earth for conflict. It was beige, peaceful, and blessedly boring. Or so I thought. The conflict started, as these things often do, with something small. A notice on my door, printed on offensively pink paper, about the height of my grass. I was 0.2 of an inch over the prescribed limit. I sighed, mowed the lawn, and forgot about it. Then came a notice about my garbage cans being visible from the street for 45 minutes past the designated 9 a.m. cutoff. I received a $25 fine for that one. I was beginning to see the steel framework beneath the neighborhood's idyllic facade. But the guest house, that was Brenda's magnum opus. It was a charming little structure, built by my grandfather back in the 50s. It was solid, made of brick and old-growth timber, with a slate roof that had weathered decades of storms. To me, it was more than a building, it was a legacy. It was where my father first taught me how to use a lathe. It was where I planned to spend my retirement turning wood and tinkering with old engines. To Brenda, it was an unauthorized auxiliary dwelling unit. It's a violation of Covenant 17b, subsection 4, she had announced, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. She stood on my welcome mat like a conquering general planting a flag. I had tried reason first. It's my default setting. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice even. This structure has been here since before this neighborhood was even a concept. It predates the HOA by about 50 years. Her eyes, small and hard like ball bearings, narrowed. The rules are the rules. It doesn't matter when it was built. It exists now, in our jurisdiction. That was her favorite phrase, in our jurisdiction. She said it like she was the warden of a maximum security prison, not the manager of a glorified gardening club. I think you'll find that pre-existing structures are typically grandfathered in, I countered, the engineer in me instinctively reaching for logic and precedent. We don't grandfather things in Willow Creek, she sniffed, as if the very concept was distasteful. That implies a lack of order. We have standards. The conversation went nowhere. She was a brick wall, but a poorly designed one, without any structural integrity holding up her arguments. Still, she was a wall I couldn't get past. Not yet. The letters started arriving daily. Each one was more threatening than the last. They were plastered on my front door, a constant, ugly reminder of her obsession. The fines began to accumulate, imaginary numbers on a piece of paper that she treated with the gravity of a federal indictment. My neighbors scurried away when they saw her approach my house. They'd offer me sympathetic glances from behind their curtains, but no one dared to speak up. Brenda had cultivated an atmosphere of fear that was as thick and choking as summer humidity. She ruled through intimidation and the selective enforcement of a 300-page book of bylaws that no one but her had ever bothered to read. The turning point, the moment my patient, peace-seeking demeanor cracked like cheap concrete under a sledgehammer, came about a month into the siege. I was in the guest house, my new workshop, sorting through a box of my wife's old gardening tools. The scent of potting soil and old leather gloves filled the air, and for a moment, I could almost feel her there with me. It was a fragile piece, but it was mine. Then I saw it. A large, official-looking sticker had been slapped onto the main window. It was bright, aggressive orange. Notice of pending lien, it screamed in bold black letters. This property is in violation. It was a public shaming. A scarlet letter for my home. But it was more than that. It was a direct threat to the one thing I had left that truly mattered, the home my family had built, the place I had come to find sanctuary. A lien was a legal claim, a shot across the bow that said, "We can take this from you." Something inside me shifted. The grief that had softened my edges began to harden into something else. Something cold and sharp. The engineer who analyzed stress points, who looked for weaknesses in a structure, woke up from a long sleep. Brenda had made a critical miscalculation. She thought she was dealing with a sad old man who would eventually roll over and capitulate. She had no idea she was trying to demolish a building whose foundations were far deeper and stronger than she could possibly imagine. She had pushed me too far. And now, I was going to push back. My first move wasn't confrontational. It was strategic. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my dining room table with a laptop, a fresh legal pad, and a pot of black coffee. It was time to stop arguing and start investigating. It was time to draft a blueprint for her destruction. I called this little project, Operation Termite. Termites are patient. They are methodical. They work silently from the inside, chewing away at the hidden framework until the whole rotten structure collapses under its own weight. Brenda was the structure. I was going to be the termite. My first stop was the county records office website. I spent hours digging through digital archives, pulling up deeds, plats, and zoning ordinances going back a century. My fingers clicked away on the keyboard, the sound sharp in the silent house. It felt good to have a mission, a problem to solve. My property was one of the original parcels in the area, purchased by my grandfather in 1950. The guest house, which he'd built as a workshop for his small cabinet-making business, was completed in 1952. The subdivision of Willow Creek Estates wasn't incorporated until 1998. The details were dry, but to me, they were beautiful. They were facts. They were ammunition. And then I found it. The crown jewel. It was a scanned document from a town council meeting in July of 1952. The resolution was clear: Lot 7, the parcel of land my house now sat on, was granted a zoning variance. Due to my grandfather's business, the auxiliary structure, my guest house, was officially zoned for light commercial use. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't just grandfathered in. It wasn't just a pre-existing structure. It was a commercially zoned building. It fell completely outside the purview of a residential homeowners association. Brenda's authority, her entire basis for harassing me, was built on sand. Her jurisdiction, which she held so dear, ended exactly where my workshop's foundation began. She had no more legal right to tell me to demolish that building than she had to order the demolition of the town hall. This was more than a shield. This was a sword. But I knew revealing it right away would be a mistake. It would solve my problem, yes, but it wouldn't solve the problem. The problem was Brenda. If I just made her back off my property, she would simply find another target, another quiet person to bully into submission. No, this required a more elegant solution. This required the full execution of Operation Termite. I needed to do more than just win. I needed to dismantle her entire empire of petty tyranny. The next phase of my plan involved hardware. I was an engineer, after all. I ordered 4 high-definition, motion-activated security cameras. They were small, discreet, and had excellent night vision. I spent a weekend installing them, placing them carefully to cover my entire front yard, my porch, and the approach to the guest house. I set up a server in my basement to store the footage. Every interaction, every notice slapped on my door, every lingering glare from her car would now be documented in crystal clear 1080p. I also made a call to an old friend, a man named Frank who had been my college roommate. Frank was now a semi-retired lawyer who spent most of his days fly fishing, but his mind was still as sharp as a tack. "Frank," I said, after we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries, "I have a bit of an HOA situation." He groaned. "Say no more. Is she a power-tripping tyrant with a bad haircut and a clipboard?" "You've met Brenda?" I asked, a hint of a smile in my voice. "I've met 100 Brendas," he chuckled. "They're a species unto themselves." "So, what's her angle?" I explained the whole saga, from the grass clippings to the lien notice. I told him about the commercial zoning I'd discovered. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, a low whistle. "Oh, she has no idea who she's messing with, does she?" Frank said, a new energy in his voice. "This is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. She's not just wrong, she's legally impotent." "So what do I do?" I asked. "You let her dig," he said, his voice turning serious. "You let her dig her own grave. Don't show her the zoning document yet. That's your ace in the hole. For now, you document everything. Every letter, every conversation, every nasty look. Let her escalate. The deeper the hole she digs, the more satisfying it will be to watch her try to climb out of it." His advice confirmed my own instincts. This was a long game. So, I began to bait the trap. I hired a landscaping company to deliver a pallet of expensive flagstones and several bags of mortar. I had them placed right in my driveway, in plain sight. Then, I started making a show of taking measurements around the guest house, running string lines, and drawing plans on a clipboard of my own. I wasn't actually doing anything. It was all a performance. But it was a performance designed to trigger Brenda's control freak sensibilities. It worked better than I could have imagined. Less than 24 hours after the flagstones arrived, Brenda was on my porch. The motion-activated camera above my door started recording the moment she stepped onto the walkway. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the pallet. "You are not authorized to make any exterior modifications. This is a direct violation of Section 24C. "I'm just planning a small patio," I said calmly, making sure to stand in clear view of the camera. "For my workshop." Her face went from its usual pale shade of disapproval to a blotchy, alarming red. It looked like a map of rage. "Your workshop is an illegal structure," she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. "You will not add a patio to an illegal structure. I forbid it." "I don't believe you have the authority to forbid it, Brenda," I said, my voice still level. This was a calculated risk. I was poking the bear. But I needed her reaction on camera. I needed to document her unhinged behavior. "I am the president of this association. My authority is absolute," she yelled. "I am issuing you another fine. $1,000. And I'm having my lawyer draft a cease and desist order." She stormed off, her sensible shoes clacking angrily on the pavement. I went inside and smiled as I watched the footage on my computer. The audio was perfect. My authority is absolute. It was a beautiful, self-incriminating little soundbite. I saved the file to a secure, encrypted hard drive, labeling it Exhibit A. The next few weeks were a steady escalation. True to her word, a cease and desist letter arrived from an expensive-looking law firm. Frank laughed when I read it to him over the phone. "It's all fluff," he said. "Standard intimidation tactics. It has no legal teeth without a court order, which they'll never get. Just file it." Brenda also made good on her threat to fine me. The notices, now on a blood-red paper, became a daily fixture on my door. The total she claimed I owed was now well over $10,000. It was monopoly money, but the intent behind it was malicious. She also took her campaign to the community Facebook group. She posted thinly veiled warnings about rogue homeowners who disregarded our community standards and threatened our property values. She never used my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Some of the comments were from her sycophants, cheering her on. But I also started to receive private messages. "Hang in there," one said. "She tried to fine me last year because my son's bicycle was the wrong color. Don't let her win," another read. "She forced the Millers to move out because they planted roses instead of azaleas." I was not alone. I was just the first person who had the means and the motivation to fight back. These messages became part of my documentation, screenshots saved neatly in a folder labeled Community Impact. The real break, the moment Brenda stepped from petty tyrant to actual criminal, happened on a Tuesday night. It was raining hard, a real southern thunderstorm. I was reading in my living room when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. Motion detected at the side of the house, near the guest house. I pulled up the live feed on my tablet. The image was grainy through the sheets of rain, illuminated only by flashes of lightning. But I could clearly see a figure, clad in a dark raincoat, trying to pry open one of the workshop's windows with a crowbar. My heart hammered in my chest. I almost called the police. But then, a flash of lightning lit up the scene, and I saw the person's face. It was Brenda. I couldn't believe it. She was actually trying to break into my property. What was she hoping to find? Was she trying to plant something? Vandalize my tools? I sat there, frozen, just watching the footage. She struggled with the window for a few minutes, clearly not skilled in the art of breaking and entering. Finally, she gave up, threw the crowbar into the bushes in frustration, and scurried back towards her own house 2 doors down. The entire event, from start to finish, was captured in high-definition video. The crowbar. Her face. Her rage. I went back to my computer, my hand shaking slightly, not with fear, but with a cold, thrilling sense of victory. I downloaded the video file. I zoomed in on the image of her face, clear as day. I saved it as Exhibit B. Operation Termite was no longer just about exposing her abuse of power. It was now about a criminal investigation. The next day, I retrieved the crowbar from the bushes using a pair of gloves. I placed it in a plastic bag. It was a cheap, generic brand, but I was willing to bet her fingerprints were all over it. With the zoning documents, the video of her threats, the screenshots of her online harassment, and now, video evidence of attempted breaking and entering, I had a very strong case. It was time to spring the trap. But not all at once. This had to be done in stages. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue for the first reveal. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I made a dozen copies of the 1952 zoning document. I prepared a calm, concise statement. I also reached out to a few of the neighbors who had messaged me privately. I told them I was going to be making a stand at the meeting and that I could use their support, even if it was just their presence. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was buzzing with a nervous energy. Brenda sat at the head table like a queen holding court, flanked by her 2 loyal board members, a timid-looking man named George who was the treasurer, and a stern-faced woman who was the secretary. The first hour was a tedious recitation of budgets and landscaping committee reports. I sat patiently in the back row, my folder resting on my lap. I could feel Brenda's eyes on me from time to time, her gaze filled with triumphant spite. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was there to beg. Finally, she opened the floor for new business. I stood up. A hush fell over the room. I have a point of order regarding the fines and legal actions being levied against my property, Lot 7, I began, my voice steady. Brenda's lips curled into a smug smile. That is not a point of order. That is a private compliance issue. We will not be discussing your violations in a public forum. Actually, I said, walking slowly towards the front of the room. It's a matter of jurisdiction, which absolutely affects this entire board. You see, you've been attempting to enforce residential covenants on a property that is, and has been since 1952, zoned for commercial use. I placed a copy of the zoning document in front of her. Then I handed one to George, and one to the secretary. I walked along the front row, handing out more copies to my neighbors. A murmur went through the crowd as people read the document. Brenda glanced at it, her face a mask of confusion that quickly curdled into fury. This is fake, she spat. This is a forgery. It is a public record, obtained from the county clerk's office, I said calmly. It is legally binding and has been for over 70 years. It means your bylaws, your fines, your threats, and your lien are all completely, utterly void. You have no authority over my guest house. You never did. The room was silent for a moment, and then people started talking at once. George, the treasurer, was staring at the paper, his face pale. Brenda shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is an outrage. You think you can waltz in here with your fake papers and undermine this board? I will sue you for slander. I will sue you for everything you have. Her voice was shrill, cracking with rage. The mask of the calm, authoritative president had shattered, revealing the hysterical bully underneath. I am just presenting the facts, Brenda, I said, turning to face the assembled homeowners. The fact is, the president of our HOA has been using our dues to fund a personal, illegal vendetta against me, based on rules that do not apply. He's a liar, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He is trying to destroy our community. He must be removed. But her credibility was gone. The neighbors weren't looking at me with suspicion anymore. They were looking at her. They saw her for what she was, a tyrant who had been caught. She had lost the crowd, but she wasn't finished. I knew this was just the beginning of her retaliation. The meeting broke up in chaos, but as I walked out, several people stopped me, clapping me on the shoulder, whispering "thank you" and "good for you." I had won the battle, but the war was about to enter its most vicious phase. Brenda's reaction was exactly what Frank and I had predicted. Cornered animals don't give up, they get more dangerous. Her public humiliation at the HOA meeting lit a fire under her, and she came at me with everything she had. The smear campaign started almost immediately. Anonymous flyers appeared on every doorstep in Willow Creek. They were poorly printed, filled with typos, but the message was vile. They accused me of being a disruptive influence, of harboring criminal intentions, and hinted that my workshop was a front for something illegal. It was slander, pure and simple. Then she escalated to official channels. I received a visit from a county code enforcement officer. A complaint had been filed, alleging that I was running an unlicensed industrial business out of my guest house, complete with hazardous materials and excessive noise. I calmly invited the officer, a weary-looking man named Dave, to inspect the property. He walked through my workshop, saw my woodworking tools and my half-finished birdhouses, and shook his head. "Looks like a hobby shop to me," he said with a sigh. "We get these calls all the time. Spite complaints. Sorry to have wasted your time." "No waste at all," I replied. "Would you be willing to sign a statement to that effect?" He raised an eyebrow, but I explained the situation with the HOA. He listened patiently and, to my surprise, agreed. He wrote a brief report confirming there were no violations and that the complaint was unfounded. I scanned it and saved it to my evidence folder, labeled Exhibit C. Brenda's next attack was more personal, and far more insidious. She tried to go after my professional standing. I received a certified letter from the State Board of Professional Engineers. A formal complaint had been filed against me, anonymous of course, alleging gross negligence on a project I had supervised 15 years ago, before I retired. It was a baseless accusation, but the board was obligated to investigate. This was a low blow. My reputation, my entire career, was built on a foundation of integrity and meticulous work. The accusation, though false, felt like a stain. It meant phone calls, digging through old files, and the stress of a formal review. The rage I felt was cold and clean. She had crossed a line from harassing a homeowner to trying to destroy a man's legacy. She was no longer just a nuisance, she was a menace. It was time to bring in the final piece of the puzzle. It was time for the whistleblower. My instincts told me that George, the pale, nervous treasurer, was the weak link in Brenda's chain of command. At the meeting, he hadn't looked angry when I presented the zoning document, he had looked terrified. He knew something. I decided to approach him directly, but carefully. I found his address in the HOA directory and drove to his house one afternoon. He lived in a small, impeccably neat home at the other end of the neighborhood. He opened the door a crack, his eyes wide with fear when he saw it was me. "I can't talk to you," he whispered, trying to close the door. "George, wait," I said, putting my hand up. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you. I'm here to ask for your help. You know what she's doing is wrong. She'll destroy me," he stammered, his gaze darting around as if Brenda might materialize out of thin air. "You don't know what she's like." "I think I have a pretty good idea," I said gently. "But she can only hurt you if you're alone. We don't have to be alone. I have evidence, George. Real, hard evidence of her crimes. Attempted breaking and entering, for a start." His eyes widened. "I just have a feeling that's not the only crime she's committed," I continued, watching him closely. "I'm an engineer. I look at structures. And the financial structure of this HOA. It doesn't look sound. You're the treasurer. You know the numbers, don't you?" He swallowed hard, his face a miserable portrait of conflict. He was a man trapped between his conscience and his fear. "I can protect you, George," I said, my voice firm but reassuring. "But you have to help me." Help me stop her before she ruins more lives. I gave him my phone number and a prepaid burner phone I'd bought for this exact purpose. Call me on this when you're ready. No one will know. I left not knowing if he would call. It was a gamble. 3 agonizing days passed. The complaint with the engineering board was causing me headaches. I had to hire a lawyer to represent me. The costs were mounting. I started to wonder if I had misjudged George. Then, on the 4th night, the burner phone rang. I can meet you, George's voice was a strained whisper. Tomorrow. Midnight. The park at the edge of the subdivision. The meeting felt like something out of a spy movie. We sat on a cold park bench under a single dim light. George was clutching a thick manila envelope to his chest like a life raft. She's been doing it for years, he began, his words tumbling out in a rush. Skimming money. Inflating invoices from the landscaping company, it's her cousin's company, you know. They bill the HOA for $20,000, he does $10,000 worth of work, and they split the difference. He opened the envelope and showed me the documents. There were copies of invoices, bank statements, and emails between Brenda and her cousin. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of embezzlement and fraud. There's more, he said, his voice trembling. She took out a loan against the HOA's reserve fund 2 years ago. For emergency roof repairs on the clubhouse. The repairs never happened. The money. It just vanished. We're on the verge of bankruptcy, and no one knows but me and her. The scope of her criminality was breathtaking. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about greed. She was bankrupting the entire community to fund her lifestyle. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She threatened me, he said, looking down at his hands. She knows about a mistake I made at my old job. She said she'd expose me, ruin my family. I was trapped. You're not trapped anymore, I said, taking the envelope from him. You did the right thing, George. This is enough. This ends it. The next morning, I didn't call the local police. This was bigger than a simple break-in now. This was fraud, embezzlement, racketeering. This was a case for the district attorney. I called Frank, my lawyer friend, and told him everything. He was silent for a long moment. Wow, he finally said. She's not just a tyrant, she's a one-woman crime wave. Okay. Don't do anything else. I'll make a call. We're going to hand-deliver this entire package to a friend of mine in the DA's white-collar crime division. We're going to bypass the local cops and go straight to the top. 2 days later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room downtown, across from a sharp, no-nonsense assistant district attorney named Maria Sandoval. Frank was beside me. On the table between us was my evidence folder, now nearly 5 inches thick. I walked her through the entire story, from the first find to the zoning documents, the video of the attempted break-in, and finally, the financial records George had provided. I laid it all out, piece by methodical piece. Sandoval listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she slowly leafed through the documents, her eyes scanning the invoices and bank statements. Mr. Miller, she said finally, looking up at me. You've done our job for us. This is one of the most well-documented cases of small-scale corruption I've ever seen. She turned to Frank. Your client is a hell of an investigator. He's an engineer, Frank said with a grin. They like things to be precise. We'll be opening a formal investigation immediately, Sandoval said, her voice all business. A grand jury will be convened. Based on this evidence, I have no doubt we'll secure indictments. But we need to handle this carefully. We need to make sure she doesn't destroy any evidence. We spent the next hour mapping out the final phase of Operation Termite. This wasn't just my plan anymore, it was a coordinated legal strike. And it was going to be glorious. The final showdown was set for a specially called emergency HOA meeting. The pretense for the meeting was a critical budget shortfall that required immediate community attention, a pretense that was, thanks to Brenda's thievery, entirely true. I worked with a few of the other homeowners, the ones who had been secretly supporting me, to get the required number of signatures to force the meeting. Brenda couldn't refuse it. She probably thought it was her chance to publicly crucify me over the budget issues she herself had created. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Brenda was at the head table, looking smug and confident. She clearly thought she had weathered the storm of my zoning revelation and was now back in control. The plan was for me to present my case. Ada Sandoval had two plainclothes detectives sitting in the back of the room, blending in with the homeowners. They were there to observe, and to act when the time was right. George was also there, sitting in the front row, looking terrified but resolute. He was ready to corroborate the financial evidence. Brenda banged her gavel. "This emergency meeting has been called to discuss a serious financial situation," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Due to unforeseen expenses and certain homeowners refusing to pay their dues," she shot a venomous glare in my direction, "we are facing a significant deficit." "Before we discuss the deficit," I said, standing up from my seat, "I believe the community deserves to know how we got here." I had a projector and a laptop, which I had set up earlier. With a click of a button, the first slide appeared on the screen behind Brenda. It was a high-resolution copy of the 1952 zoning ordinance. "As many of you know," I began, my voice amplified by a small microphone I had brought, "Brenda, in her capacity as HOA president, has spent thousands of dollars in HOA funds on legal fees and administrative costs to harass me over a building she has no jurisdiction over. This was the first drain on our resources." Brenda started to object, but I was just getting started. "But that's just mismanagement," I continued, clicking to the next slide. "What I'm here to talk about tonight is not just mismanagement. It's felony-level crime." The room went dead silent. The next slide was a still image from my security camera, showing Brenda in her raincoat, crowbar in hand, at my workshop window. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This is your HOA president attempting to commit breaking and entering on my property," I said, my voice cold and hard. "An act for which I have already filed a police report." Brenda's face was ashen. "That's doctored. It's fake. He's trying to frame me." "Is it fake, Brenda?" I asked, my eyes locked on hers. "Or were you just trying to enforce your absolute authority?" I didn't wait for an answer. I clicked to the next slide. It was a side-by-side comparison of an invoice from her cousin's landscaping company for $20,000 and a quote from a competing company for the same work for $9,000. "And now we come to the real reason for our budget shortfall," I said. "For the past 5 years, Brenda has been colluding with a landscaping company owned by her cousin to systematically defraud this community." I put up slide after slide. Fake invoices. Padded bills. Payments for work that was never done. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was all laid out in a clear, easy-to-understand presentation. "And where did the money go?" I asked the silent, stunned room. The next slide showed bank statements. Transfers from the HOA account to a private account. An account belonging to Brenda. "She stole it," I said simply. "She stole it all. The loan for the new roof that never happened. The surplus from our dues. She has embezzled over $200,000 from the people in this room." George stood up. "It's true," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "As treasurer, I have the original documents. She made me help her cover it up. She threatened me. But I won't be silent anymore." That was the breaking point. Brenda completely unraveled. "Lies. All lies," she screamed, scrambling to her feet, knocking over her chair. Her eyes were wild. "You are all against me. You worthless, ungrateful people. I built this community. I own this community." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "And you. You will pay for this. I will ruin you. I will burn your house to the ground." It was at that moment that the two detectives stood up from the back of the room. They walked calmly and purposefully towards the front. "Brenda," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and making terroristic threats." The look on Brenda's face was a spectacular collage of shock, disbelief, and pure, undiluted rage. She seemed to shrink before our eyes as the detective took her arm. "You can't arrest me," she shrieked, trying to pull away. "I am the president." As they led her out of the clubhouse, she turned her head, her eyes locking with mine one last time. The smugness was gone, replaced by a venomous hatred. "This isn't over, Miller," she screamed, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You'll regret this. I'll own this house." It was her last, impotent threat. A final, hollow echo from a collapsing empire. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her, and for a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the projector. Operation Termite was complete. The rotten structure had been brought down. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda's downfall was the talk of the town. The local news even ran a small story about the HOA president from hell, who had been arrested for embezzling $250,000. With the evidence I had compiled and George's brave testimony, the district attorney's case was airtight. Brenda's high-priced lawyer couldn't do a thing. Faced with a mountain of undeniable proof, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. The judge was particularly harsh, citing her egregious abuse of trust and the malicious, targeted harassment of me and other residents. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant her house, her car, and all her assets were seized and sold off. By the time the courts were done with her, she had nothing left. Her last threat to me, that she would own my house, became a bitter irony. She couldn't even afford a lawyer to appeal her sentence. The community, liberated from her reign of terror, began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, comprised of decent, reasonable people who had been too intimidated to run before. One of their first acts was to formally rescind all fines and actions against me and to issue a public, written apology on behalf of the association. They even paid for my legal fees related to the frivolous complaint against my engineering license, which was, of course, dismissed. They went through the 300-page book of bylaws with a red pen, striking out dozens of the most ridiculous and restrictive rules. The one about the color of bicycles was the first to go. A sense of freedom and neighborliness returned to Willow Creek. People started talking to each other again. Kids left their toys on the lawn without fear of a citation. It started to feel like the peaceful community I had hoped for when I first moved in. I became something of a local hero, a title I was deeply uncomfortable with. People would stop me on my walks, shake my hand, and thank me for what I did. I always told them the same thing: I just wanted to be left alone to work in my shop. George, the treasurer, was given immunity for his cooperation. He was hailed as a hero in his own right. The weight of Brenda's threats lifted from his shoulders, and he seemed to stand a little taller. He became a respected member of the new finance committee, helping to rebuild the community's shattered accounts. As for me, I found the peace I had been searching for. The lean notice on my workshop window was long gone, replaced by the clear, clean glass I had installed myself. The guest house, my legacy, was safe. I spent my days in there, the scent of sawdust and machine oil filling the air. The hum of the lathe was a comforting sound. I built birdhouses, repaired old furniture, and tinkered with a vintage motorcycle engine I had bought on a whim. My hands were busy, and my mind was calm. Sometimes, when I looked out the window of my workshop, across my perfectly imperfect lawn, I would think about the whole ordeal. I had moved to Willow Creek to escape the ghosts of my past, only to find a monster in the present. I never wanted a fight. I never sought to be a giant slayer. But Brenda had taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, peace isn't something you find, it's something you have to build, and something you have to defend. Sometimes, the most peaceful man, when pushed too far, has to become a warrior to protect his sanctuary. I had analyzed the problem like a structural engineer. I found the weak points, calculated the stress loads, and applied pressure until the whole corrupt edifice collapsed. It was, in its own way, a kind of justice. A poetic, well-engineered justice. One sunny afternoon, a few months after Brenda's sentencing, my friend Frank came to visit. I gave him the grand tour of the workshop. He admired a rocking chair I was finishing, running his hand over the smooth, polished wood. "You know," he said, looking around the peaceful space. "For a while there, this little building caused you a world of trouble." I smiled, wiping my hands on a rag. "It did," I agreed. "But in the end, it wasn't just a building. It was a foundation. And it was worth fighting for. And in the quiet hum of my workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of my father and the memory of my wife, I was finally, truly, at peace. I was home.